Well, thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to have Dr. Tristan Kennedy come and talk to us about Earthships. So this webinar is hosted by One House Many Nations. As most of you I can see, I think I know most of you that have joined right now, but One House Many Nations is a part of the Idle No More movement. And so we started this campaign about 5 years ago to look at the housing crisis on First Nations and in Indigenous communities, raise awareness about it, and then take action. And so that we've been really working with lots of people to try and think about how housing can be a form of land back movement or land defense, but also thinking about sustainability and then the way that we build, and then of course connecting that to the housing crisis and how to think about and undo some of the systemic barriers that exist around housing. So Tristan, we're really excited to have you, and we met in Arizona, and you have a podcast and you're a professor over there in Australia, and your work is really interesting. We're looking at social media and heavy metal, I think it was, and yeah. So like you're doing a whole range of really cool things. So we're excited that you're here. We were supposed to connect with the group in Big River. There's 5 youth there that are part of this One House Many Nations Making the Shift research. So they're working with a team of people, myself and others that are actually on right now, Lancelot and Tiffany, and others that are designing and then building a small house in their community. And eventually one of those youth that design and help build it will live in it. And so this is part of their research. They were very interested in hearing more about Earthships. So it's really great to see that that you're able to come and talk to them. So we'll record this and they'll watch this video tomorrow when they have their meeting. So welcome. I'm here in Treaty 5 territory in my home community of Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And I see that people are joining from all over. So if you'd like to introduce yourself in another way, that would be great. And again, welcome.
Thanks, Alex. I'm so excited for this opportunity. I was just sort of, well, as you know, talking to you about how putting together this lecture has actually kind of consolidated a lot of the experiences and learnings that we've gone through, me and my partner and the team who are building this over the last kind of 2 years. And so it's a great opportunity for me to kind of get my ideas straight, to reflect on what's going on, but also to share it. So I really appreciate the opportunity. It's great. Thank you. I guess at the outset, I have to acknowledge that my role in this whole thing is owner builder. My partner's the project manager and owner builder. And a lot of the stuff that I've learned came from a guy called Dr. Martin Freeney, and I'll post a link. I have shared some links to some of his work and to some websites as well. But I just wanted to get that out there at the outset. I'm Tristan Kennedy, as Alex suggested. It's lovely to e-meet you all and to see some familiar names and faces in the crowd as well. My background personally is I'm Noongar Aboriginal Australian on my father's side. My mother's side, I have Irish Australian ancestry. I was born on Kaurna Country, which is the Adelaide Plains in South Australia. For those of you who are a bit unfamiliar with the kind of location, I will actually show you during this presentation, but essentially it's kind of in the middle of the continent of Australia and right down the bottom. It's I quite like the area. It's a sort of moderate, temperate kind of Mediterranean style climate. But yeah, I was born on Kaurna Country. So I consider myself obviously part of the Kaurna community. I work on Darug Country in Macquarie University in Sydney. So I travel most years. This year not so much, but I travel quite a bit to get over there and sort of partly live and work on Darug Country with community and mob over there. So I acknowledge all the Indigenous people that have rocked up today, and all the First Nations and Native American peoples that might be in the room with us as well. I wonder if we do have a small group, and I wonder if it might be worth just sort of going around if people are interested in introducing themselves and letting us know a little bit about where they're coming from today. And look, why don't we start in the sort of order that I can see everyone on the screen, and that's Lancelot. If you've finished the washing up and you're able to speak, that'd be that'd be great.
All right. So, well, first of all, thanks for agreeing to talk with us and with Alex here. It's a real honor, and I'm excited to hear about the project and your story. I feel like that's actually what connects us all, is that we're all unfolding in a particular story, and we find ourselves working together in some kind of profound ways over this long distance at this point. So anyway, just as a gesture, I want to say thank you for that. I come from Philadelphia in the United States on the East Coast, and in the Wissahickon Valley, and I moved to Canada in 2005 to start teaching at the University of Manitoba. And I've been, I don't know, deeply fortunate to work with a number of communities. I find that the teaching and the research that I do with my students is all community-based. And it ends up inevitably moving towards more and more, I would say, connected projects, connected to the main issues. And this has led me to where I am working now with, fortunate enough to be working with Alex, and I see Shirley here on the call. And so, yeah, I teach architecture, I teach technology, and I'm interested in community-based design, and I'm also interested in novel building methods using flexibility and nature as a model for construction. Thanks.
Great, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Tiffany McAdam.
Hi, I'm Tiffany McAdam. I'm from Big River First Nations, but I currently live in Saskatoon. I am going to the U of S for nursing, and yeah, I'm a research assistant for the One House Many Nations.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tiffany. It's nice to meet you. Erica?
Hi, everyone. So sorry, I'm just off camera, and I'm probably going to mute once this is over. I have a pretty bad connection. I'm actually based out of Winnipeg, but not sure. My apartment has a really bad connection. But yeah, my name is Erica Vass. I'm originally from Lethbridge, Alberta, so Treaty 7 territory. I moved to Winnipeg 3 years ago to pursue my master's, and I've since then finished. So a master's in development practice with focus in Indigenous development. I've always been a really big fan of Dr. Wilson's work in One House Many Nations, and I had the ability or opportunity to head up to a Opaskwayak Cree Nation one summer and be there at the site and help a little bit there. So that was wonderful. And just in general, I've always had a interest in tiny homes, and my major research project for my master's focused on reserve housing, looking at use of community-led initiatives, so looking at tiny houses. So Tristan, Dr. Kennedy, I'm just happy to be here and hear you speak. I saw this on Facebook, so just an hour ago, so I was really happy to hop on. So thank you so much for being here.
Great, nice to meet you. I hope I get to travel over to the Opaskwayak Cree Nation and have a look at this One House Many Nations build soon as well. That'd be wonderful. Bronwyn, do you want to say a few words?
Hello, I'm Bronwyn Carlson, and I'm the head of Indigenous Studies at Macquarie University, and I've had the privilege of working with Alex for a number of years now, and absolutely love it. And we were just saying at this point in time in 2020, Alex was supposed to be with us at Macquarie University as a visiting scholar, and so we're hoping that in the next year maybe that we'll still be able to do that. So I'm also Tristan's colleague, very interested in his project, and I'm also really interested in sustainable housing particularly for Indigenous people. We have a great deal of homelessness in the Indigenous population here in Australia too, so these could be options or some way of solving some of those issues in the future. So lovely to be here.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Shirley Thompson, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thanks for asking. So my background is I work with the University of Manitoba, and I'm working on a couple of housing projects in some fly-in remote communities. And so we had a 2-year training program that was an Indigenous college-led and community-led to build 2 houses that they designed, and realizing we maybe started too big, and they're still being finished almost 2 years later, and that we're now working with another community starting around a smaller house, a smaller design based, really learning from Alex as well, and working with Alex on her projects.
Great, thanks. Maddie, do you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, this is Maddie, and today we're coming to you from Kaurna Country, where Macquarie University stands. Yeah, we work with Tristan also, and yeah, can't wait to hear your presentation, Tris.
Thanks. And Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Tris. Yeah, I'm a settler academic with English heritage. I live and currently work remotely on Dharawal country on the east coast of Australia, just an hour or so south of Sydney, not too far from Bronwyn actually. So yeah, I work with Bronwyn on her current social media project, and I'm a colleague of Tris's, and I'm pretty keen to hear more about this incredible Earthship that he's been building out of the ground. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. And Kim Lee, who's just joined us. I think we're just going around sort of introducing ourselves, if we like.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yeah. Nice to e-meet you.
Yes, hi, thank you. Sorry, I just joined. I'm currently working with Blood Vein First Nation in 4 hours north of Winnipeg. It's on the east side. Yeah, and so there's a number of different kind of projects we're trying to get going up there.
Awesome, thanks so much. It's great to meet you all, and I'm really happy that we've obviously all coming from various backgrounds, but with sort of shared interests. So I hope that I can offer you something interesting and useful for your purposes and for your own interests. I've kind of mixed it up. There's a few photos of the site, and we can talk a little bit about that. And then there's some data for those who are interested in a bit more of the kind of technical aspects of stuff, and then a bit more of a discussion about the kind of concept of an Earthship kind of today, and how it works, at least in the southern part of Australia. So hopefully, I'll share my screen now, and maybe someone can give me a thumbs up just to make sure that we're on.
All good.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've called this project Earthship Inman Valley, and it's essentially an off-grid sustainable build on Kaurna Country in South Australia. And I'll talk a little bit about where Kaurna Country is and how we kind of came to even kind of call this building an Earthship. Mike Reynolds, who some of you might know, is particularly protective of the concept of Earthship. There's some key elements that any building kind of has to satisfy before it can kind of be called an Earthship, and this one's kind of like an Earthship / passive house, and you'll see when we look at the plans and some other things about kind of exactly how that works. Mike Reynolds has actually seen the plans to this build. We sent them off to him with the intention that he would actually come over with his crew from North America and run workshops for people from all over the world, but essentially from Australia, to help build this thing. That was kind of exciting, and then COVID kind of happened, and there's just really no way we were going to get anybody from the United States coming over to build this. It was actually meant to be happening right now in October, which is probably the perfect weather to be doing it. But as it stands, we've got quite a few local crew from South Australia. We have some from Queensland and New South Wales. We have some hopefuls in Victoria who want to kind of come over, but at the moment there's just absolutely no way you can cross that border. There's a hard border restriction. So it's ended up being a bit of a sort of locally focused, I guess, community build in the sense of the workshop. I think I've already kind of done the acknowledgement, but of course I'd like to acknowledge that the Earthship itself, the building, is being constructed on the unceded lands of the Kaurna and the Ngarrindjeri nations, Ramangeri in particular. And of course Macquarie University, where I work, is built on the unceded lands of the Wadawurrung people of the Darug Nation. So in terms of country, this is a close-up. I'll just, hopefully we can get a, no, we're not going to be able to go to that link. Look, if you look at, well, maybe I'll try and get there. No, we're not going to get there. Sorry. If you look at the sort of map of Australia, the continent, you essentially have, you know, kind of the east coast that most people are sort of familiar with. That's sort of, you know, Queensland at the top, New South Wales and Victoria, then the island of Tasmania. Move over west a little bit. In the middle, down the bottom, is Adelaide, where I'm from. And you can see from this slide here that this is Kaurna Country. These are the Adelaide Plains. It's relatively flat kind of land bordered by the Mount Lofty Ranges, which essentially kind of follow this path all the way up through here past Kaurna Country, where we sort of see the Ikara Flinders Ranges along there. The Ngarrindjeri are neighbouring mob, and they essentially kind of live on this part of the kind of country here. This is what's called the Coorong. It's a really spectacular mouth of the Murray River. It's the longest river in Australia. Really beautiful country down there. And I mean, given the kind of lack of definitive boundaries, you know, both Ngarrindjeri and Peramang, as well as Kaurna, all have a kind of cultural and you know, sovereign connection to the country that we're building on. We're looking at about where the mouse is now, is where the Earthship is being built. Very windy down there. So Kaurna Country, this is the first kind of taste, I guess, in terms of the image of where we're building. This is our little campsite up near our sort of shed where we're hoarding materials for this build. Essentially, I mean, Kaurna Country, the land over here was kind of managed by Kaurna Nation for thousands and thousands of years. There's, in terms of the kind of character of the land, we're sort of sitting on the sort of side of the Mount Lofty Ranges down here. So you're actually looking sort of southwest-ish in this image. But from the west of this image, it's pretty much down the hill onto the plains and flat land. It's a combination of grasslands and belts of trees and old growth. Now these were sort of managed because the grasslands are really great foraging area for wildlife that could be hunted and used for sustenance, for food. And you know, the trees and sort of patches of quite dense eucalypt and other kind of native species provided great cover for hunting, and were maintained through really sophisticated and complex knowledges of fire, and using fire to essentially, you know, regenerate the old growth in the grasslands at specific times of the calendar. Kaurna have about 6 seasons in their calendar, and it's related to more than just kind of the general sort of summer, autumn, winter, spring. There's you know, relationships with when it gets really, really windy, which we're kind of we're just coming up to now. There's ideas where it sort of rains a little bit during months that it perhaps doesn't necessarily rain a whole bunch in other sorts of areas. So it's a bit more complex, but they've essentially managed the land according to that calendar, to that sort of calendar of seasons, with all sorts of kind of agricultural techniques and fire burning and that sort of thing. A lot of the native plant life actually requires regular burning in order to survive. It both clears the understory of high fuel loads and prevents really extreme bushfires, but that also allows for native species to regenerate and grow without being impeded by kind of weeds and things. And I'm not sure if we have an image of it, but I'll talk about one of the clearing things we had to do in a later slide. Of course, like I was talking about the seasons and fire management and land management, management of water and that sort of stuff is really kind of based on this relational ontology that I'm sure we're all familiar with. It's more than just a kind of, let's harvest grain at this time of year. It's really about the place, yourself, land, water, climate, and obviously living and non-living beings as well. We are planning on inviting Alan Sumner, ambassador to the Kaurna Nation, to come down and do a welcome for country and essentially start the workshop off. I think we're doing that on about the 13th of November, so coming up pretty soon. If anyone has any questions, by the way, as we're kind of going through, feel free to sort of jump in. If I've sped over something and you need me to go back, or if you just want to shout out something, I'm happy to speak to that as well.
Tristan, can you just check to see if there's anyone in the waiting room? Yeah,
sure. It doesn't look like it.
Okay, great.
On the participants. Thanks. Good idea. All right, so there's some images here. This is Gus, our Airedale dog. There is someone in the waiting room now. Yeah, that's our little puppy Gus. He loves being up on this property. But this is taken from probably, let's say, about 150, 200 meters from the front entrance of the site. There's a shed there in the sort of mid-ground. That's where we sort of base ourselves at the moment for the build. But essentially, we're sitting up, looking over what's called Eagle Hawk Gully, which is kind of, well, it's just past the hill where the shed's on. That's Eagle Hawk Gully. We have some amazing bird life through there. We have a couple of resident wedge-tailed eagles, which have a wingspan. The older, well, there's two and then there's a younger one, but the older one has a wingspan of nearly 2 meters, which I guess is probably close to about 6 foot something. Pretty big birds, and they're beautiful when they come and sort of circle around and watch what we're doing. So we cut this track in to access the site. The site itself is probably about 850 meters, 900 meters, nearly a kilometer from the nearest road, which is quite nice. Further down the track, this is actually only recently kind of happened, where we're sort of building proper access. We need a lot of kind of equipment in there, particularly with the earth moving. And it's fairly steep kind of terrain. So we built this one access track. This is the site where our rainwater tank is going to go, where I'll talk about how it all works a little bit later, but we're completely off the grid with this build. There's absolutely no chance of having connection to any utilities like water or electricity or gas or sewage or anything like that. Our neighbor, who's a bit further sort of east, had been there for about 12 years, and he said he actually asked the South Australian Power Networks about whether he could get electricity brought out to his house via overhead wires, and they quoted him around about $250,000 to get the power just to the site. And then of course there's other sort of on-site infrastructure and rates that you'd have to pay. So he spent about 20,000 Australian dollars, about 13 or 14 years ago on batteries and solar panels, and hasn't had to replace any of it, and lived, you know, with him and his partner and his 2 children for that time reasonably successfully. So we don't have access to water, so we've actually put a tank on that pad in the middle there. We're looking at about 140,000 litres of water in that tank. I'm sorry, all the systems are metric that I'm using, and while I can kind of do the conversions, I don't want to try on the fly. So I hope that, you know, if you can go and Google it or something. I think with litres, if you divide it by about 4, you get gallons. So it's essentially going to be all of our water. We need about 22,000 litres set aside that only the Country Fire Service can use because we're in a high fire risk area. You can see here on this is where the house is going to be located. And down these trees here, we've had to clear out a lot of stuff to make it about 50% coverage because of the Country Fire Service regulations. But all the way down the bottom of this hill down here is substantial old growth and really kind of dense eucalypt and a lot of native shrubs and native species. We also have critically endangered bandicoots on the property. So it's really important that when we're clearing things, that we make sure that even if it's an invasive non-native like a blackberry, that we don't actually clear the whole lot, because blackberry, as much as we don't want it on the property, provides really great cover for bandicoots and other kind of native small mammals. And we do have in the area a significant population of foxes and cats that feral cats that we've picked up with trail cameras and things at various points across the property. So we're really mindful that when we clear in kind of a decent balance where we still leave enough kind of cover for native species to protect them from predators. And we work closely. My partner's a veterinary nurse who has experience in how to kind of manage habitat. And we also work with a government authority, the Natural Resources Management Authority, with biodiversity officers and researchers, just to kind of make sure that the way we're approaching our interaction with the land is kind of in harmony with the local flora and fauna. So we'll get to a few. This is another picture. I quite like this. Occasionally the cloud dips down into the valley there. It looks kind of nice. The site itself of the Earthship build, I've got the coordinates here: 3547 south, 13840 east. It's, you know, it might seem a little over the top to talk about GPS coordinates, but it's important in relation to the build, the positioning of the house and how we harvest solar energy, especially, to know exactly where we're sitting. It's about an hour and 10 minutes south of the capital of South Australia, Adelaide. And the solar elevation angle is why it's important to know the GPS coordinates. So really importantly, at the winter solstice, or the 21st of June each year, the sun sits at sits at 30.30 degrees off of the horizon. And in summer, on the 21st of December, it sits at 77.57 degrees off the horizon. And that's really important because one of the key ideas of an Earthship is that you position the house with all of your windows and openings toward the north sun, in the southern hemisphere, you would position it north. You essentially face them towards the equator, so that when you have a low sun in winter, you have the best opportunity for it to enter the building and heat up thermal mass. Whereas in summer, when the temperatures get quite warm and the sun's a little bit higher, you're able to kind of shade that sun from coming into that open sort of aspect of the build. So it's important that you kind of understand your sort of angles and things. And I have a few diagrams a bit later on that show what's going on with all that. The local area is now kind of classified as rural and primary industry. There's a lot of dairy cattle. We have some sheep on the property. to essentially help the mobs of kangaroos that we have to keep the grass down for bushfire reasons. We had just off to the left of this image, we had a reasonably significant fire event in 2018, I think. Luckily for us, the fire went in the opposite direction from our place, but it was completely unexpected. That time of the year, the prevailing winds are southeasterly, and it went in a the wind was actually blowing southwesterly for some reason, and it took out a lot of vegetation on our neighbour's property, and yeah, we were really lucky there. So yeah, we try and encourage, our neighbours don't particularly like kangaroos there, but the kangaroos, like I said, work in harmony with the environment. They're there, feeding off grasslands, and they do a really good job actually of keeping the grass to a manageable kind of level. Some people run alpaca down there. Seems to be a big thing in that area. Alpacas are good for, I guess, protecting sheep, lambs and that sort of thing from fox attack, but I think there's a whole bunch of capitalism going on there too, because alpaca wool fetches quite a high price, and there's a few hobby farms and that sort of thing around. I mentioned the kind of the sort of stats and things that I wanted to talk about, and the important kind of numbers when designing an Earthship. And the idea is, obviously, of an Earthship is that you work with what is naturally occurring. We'll talk about materials in a minute, but you really need to work with the climate, with things like prevailing winds, particularly if you're going to use wind power, solar energy, temperatures, those sorts of things, in order to kind of, it informs the design of the building. I think I'm not sure if I go on to this a bit later on, but we played around with a few different designs of the Earthship. We had kind of two separate sort of areas, I guess, or two separate buildings connected at one point. We had a double-story atrium because it seemed really grand. It wasn't really well thought out. That was a bit of my idea. I have to take the credit for that. But actually, double-story atriums on these things are actually too effective. And so you actually end up warming the house too much, even in winter, with such a big atrium. So you need to understand the kind of average temperatures, the maximums, the minimums, rainfall, all this sort of thing, in order to design the size of atriums, the types of materials you're going to use, the positioning of the house. So, I mean, the maximum and minimum means here kind of actually look like it's a really comfortable place in terms of climate. With the average temperatures in January sitting around, 25 to 26.5-ish centigrade as an average, and a little bit lower in December. Getting down to July, you're looking between 10 and 15 degrees centigrade as an average. It's important to know that we're looking at an average temperature there. The mean minimum, doesn't get much higher than 12 as a minimum during the summer. Gets down to about 4 as an average. It gets down a lot colder than that though. At some times we have a few frosts. We don't generally get snow in this particular area. A bit further north you do. Rainfall is really important. This number I think is a bit skewed, particularly in relation to the last sort of 3 or 4 years. 760 mil is a lot. I think in the last 5 years, the average is down about 600 mil. And 2 years ago, we had something like 350. It was really, really low, really dry. And then we had the bushfire. So, we need to be careful about that. The mean number of days with rain over 1 millimeter is important as well, particularly given we're off grid and using rainwater tanks. Apologies, I've just had someone deliver something at my front door. So, we've got about 94 days a year with actual rain, and that's important for us in trying to work this Earthship, that, if we're getting to kind of September, October, and we can measure the levels of our tanks, we know that we're unlikely to get significant rainfall for the next sort of 3 to 4, 5 months. And so we need to, essentially change our, can you just hang on? They're not going away. Oh, sorry, in the middle of a lecture. No worries. Apologies for that. He was, I think he could hear me talking and he was not going to take no for an answer. Anyway, so knowing the number of days of rain is really important as well. So you can manage the storage of water for summer months, particularly given that we need at least 22,500 litres to fight bushfires should they occur. More stats. These two at the top are probably more indicative of what you can expect on the site. You're looking in January, the highest temperature recorded, around about 40 degrees centigrade, so about 105, I think, Fahrenheit. And it gets to about the same for November and December. You can see why I'd rather do the workshop in October, where the highest temperatures tend to be a bit lower. And like I said, it does get a lot lower than 4 degrees during the winter. We've had a few of around -2, -3 degrees in the last few years. Maybe not as extreme as the -6 there, but the other really important thing to consider is the mean daily solar exposure. For 2 reasons, we need energy through the front atrium to heat the house. We also rely on solar panels to generate our electricity in the most part. We're looking into wind, but essentially we run a lot of solar panels to generate electricity out there. So, we get a reasonable amount, even in winter, we can expect, sort of between 5 and 10 megajoules per meter squared, which is pretty good. It's depending on how many sort of solar panels you put on a roof. You can comfortably, with a combination of battery storage, comfortably run a family home if you're careful about, not running the toaster and kettle constantly. So I was going to put these drawings a little bit earlier in the presentation, but here they are. This is one of the plans of the entire build. And I thought it was useful to show essentially how this kind of build works in a few aspects. So I'm hoping you can see the mouse here, but along the sort of bottom, this wall that curves around like this is a tire wall. So it's made out of end-of-life car tires. We'd need approximately 900 of them to build that wall. And they're all, as you probably know already, they're all pounded by hand with sledgehammers with dirt from the site. So it's a quite high clay content on the site, which makes for really great rammed earth material. So essentially, sort of lay down the tires in a kind of interlocking way, pound them with sledgehammers and a lot of manual labor. I'm just seeing there's a few more have come in to the waiting room. All right, just let me check that we're all. Okay, yeah, I think we're good. So where were we? We were talking about the tire wall here. So that's obviously we're looking at recycling and using end-of-life car tires so they don't end up in landfill or other sorts of waste areas. It's the car tires and the rammed earth is also really great to absorb energy, to work as a thermal mass. And essentially the idea is that from the north-facing atrium here, the sun in winter especially comes in and heats up these rooms and is absorbed into the thermal mass, so into the rammed earth in the car tires. And the back of the house here is also bermed. So there's, it's about a metre below the natural earth of the hill, but then there's also another kind of 1.5 meters-ish that's taken from the cut and stacked up against the back of the house. It's really great for bushfire protection, and it's also really great to create more thermal mass. Other aspects, you can see we've got the atrium along the front here. This is a really key part of Earthships. That is, essentially you have a garden indoors that is right in front of this glass wall. There's glass all the way along here. And the garden, traditionally in Earthships, this garden is watered by wastewater. So water from the shower, water from the laundry is then pumped into this planter. We're into what is a wicking bed, and then you essentially grow fruit, vegetables, plants, whatever, you know, herbs and those sorts of things from wastewater that is then, once it's been used there, it's then sort of pumped out. So you get a few uses of water. That creates a really tropical, warm climate in there that you can kind of control with, you know, by opening and closing these doors, by using these earth tubes down here, which essentially are built into the hill. They come in from the southern side of the hill, the non-sunny side of the hill, through the earth. I'm not sure exactly what depth, about over 1 meter, where the temperature seems to sit around about 15 degrees centigrade. And the idea is that, and I'll show you on a later slide, the idea is that the heat in the front room here, when you open up windows in the roof, will go out the roof, and the air needs to be replaced, so it sucks air through these tubes, which act as kind of natural air conditioning. So you don't need no power, no nothing like that. It just works on what's called the stack effect. Other aspects, the bright yellow walls here are strawbale. So this is an aspect that I think Mike Reynolds, the sort of guy who came up with this idea of Earthships, wasn't heaps keen on. Strawbale doesn't sit well with his philosophy in particular, but this is the aspect of the Earthship which probably makes it a passive house. And strawbale insulation, as some of you might know, is incredibly high performance in terms of you know, keeping in heat or keeping in regulating temperature. Let's put it that way. I think that's all that's sort of interest along here. We've got more tyres along the front there underneath the atrium windows. I was talking about how the sun comes in and you use the solar energy, not through solar panels and batteries, but just through the sun itself. The idea here is, you can see in these diagrams, in June on the winter solstice, where the sun is at its lowest at 30 degrees from the horizon, the sun's coming through the atrium windows here and working its way into the bedrooms, to the rumpus room, to the office a little bit, and essentially heating up areas within, or heating up the floor, heating up the walls, heating up the tire wall especially during winter. If we then kind of go on to summer, you can see when the angle is about 77.5, the roof is so that it cuts out most of the light. So we still, in February, get a little bit of sun on the planter, which is really great. But other than that, we don't get a lot of sunlight going into the house. So it's really easy to keep it's easier to keep the building cooler. So it's a bit tricky kind of, you know, working out all your angles and things, but, you know, time taken to work these things out really kind of, well, hopefully will pay off in the end. I've actually been, I think, yeah, on this slide I talk about visiting Earthship Iron Bank. Like the architect, Martin Freeney, built the first council approved Earthship in Australia. I'm pretty sure it was also the first Earthship that was endorsed by Mike Reynolds as an Earthship. It's a survival mode or survival model Earthship, not far from our site. We visited it one day in winter and it was about 4 degrees, 5 degrees centigrade outside as we arrived at the site. And we walked in without any heating, any energy being put into that building except for the solar through the front windows. The indoor temperature was about 22 degrees centigrade. So it's incredible without using any electricity or gas or anything like that. you know, they managed to maintain a really comfortable temperature. I guess in terms of, you know, community housing, big builds like this are probably not overly, I don't know, doable. They take a long time to plan. It's taken us 2 years to get to the point of essentially digging the site and getting ready to do the first workshop. I mentioned before we did have, you know, some initial kind of sketches and 2-story and single-story concepts and things that we worked through. The site location was moved a whole bunch of times all over the site itself. We always had to have the thing facing north within about 3 degrees. Otherwise, the atrium just does not work. The really difficult part of this planning stage was one, given the location, the bushfire zone. We had the Country Fire Service representatives come out. They took one look at it and said, you're building in what's called flame zone. That's the highest rating. And, you know, essentially they're saying it could cost you anywhere up to $300,000 plus just to fireproof your house to standard in that area, plus the cost of the house itself. So we, like I said, engaged in a sort of strategy of land clearing and future land management strategies, and managed to get our bushfire attack level rating down to 29, which generally speaking adds sort of $10,000 to $15,000 to the build, which is a lot better than $250, $300. Essentially, we have to make sure that we've got ember guard, that we've got firefighting systems, we've got you know, all sorts of backup things that we build with hardwood, we build with you know, double glazing, those sorts of things, which are all materials that you tend to use in these sorts of builds anyway, so it wasn't too much of an issue. Council approval is something that is an issue all over the world with Earthships, or in many places around the world with Earthships. If anyone's seen documentaries that Mike Reynolds has been in, you'll know the story of, you know, he was deregistered as an architect for some time because he continued with the Earthship building with waste products and without ticking certain boxes. Our architect suggested we'd need 12 months for approval with the local council, and it took 2 weeks. We managed to put together a really great proposal, and we also had the benefit of 2 things. One, there was already a previously approved Earthship in the same council district, which never went ahead, but it was approved. And we paid a private certifier to come out and work with us to fully understand how the kind of peculiarities of Earthships worked and how they can work within council frameworks, which are generally kind of box ticking frameworks. They don't open themselves up to kind of any grey areas. The wastewater management was an issue, and that's something we've had to kind of, I guess, suck it up, for want of a much better term given the context. The idea of using grey water to water an indoor planter is just something that the South Australian Board of Health and the local council just will not approve. And so, you know, we've had to kind of work out other ways to manage our wastewater through seepage trenches and outdoor planters and those sorts of things, which is, it's okay, but yeah, getting approval for these things is really difficult because they don't fit these sort of models, which are based on, I mean, in Australia especially, a lot of the housing that we have, the house that I'm sitting in right now, it's built on sort of watered down versions of architecture which came in from Europe, you know, hundreds of years ago or a few hundred years ago. They leak. They're not well insulated. They're very rarely do you have double glazed windows, and the idea is that you build a house very quickly, sell it very cheaply, and then the owners spend the rest of their lives paying really high utility bills to, you know, burn fossil fuels, gas, coal, that sort of stuff to heat and cool in relatively harsh climates.
Erica had a question about the straw bales, and is there a method to make them flame retardant, or how does that work in terms of fire safety?
Yeah, that's a really good point. They actually perform really well in terms of fire safety or bushfire risk. Our architect has a straw bale home not far from ours, and they put, I think it was about 50 or 60 millimeters of cob render over their straw bales. And that at the time was fine to make the straw bales or the straw bale walls completely kind of fire resistant. The rules have changed here in South Australia. You now need 100 millimeters thick of cob, essentially thrown over straw bales to make them approvable in relation to fire performance. That's a lot. That's a lot of cob. In terms of tonnage, you're making a very, very heavy house. It's going to take a really long time as well. We're putting a thinner layer of cob inside the house. The house is well sealed, so that's, you know, kind of doable. And outside, we're using a stud veneer with corrugated iron sheeting, which is with proper flashing and ember guard, protects the straw bales as well. Straw is packed so tightly in these instances that they don't tend to flare up as much as it perhaps would when, you know, you've got sort of grass growing out in open areas. But yeah, it's certainly something to be wary of. The benefits of straw bale for insulation far outweigh the things that you need to do in order to fireproof a building with them. It's a good question. It's probably it's a really common question, and it was a question that I had at the start of this whole thing too. You know, how do we make sure that we don't essentially build ourselves into a tinderbox? So a little bit about, and I'm sure, having sort of listened to everyone introduce themselves, I'm sure you all probably know a lot of this stuff. So I hope I'm not sort of preaching to the choir a bit here, but the idea of earthships or other sorts of sustainable architecture respond to particularly things like catastrophic climate change, global warming, and resource or future resource scarcity. So it's, you know, the Earthship responds to all of these things in terms of, you know, reducing carbon footprint, recycling waste products, etc., as well as, you know, essentially growing its own food for its inhabitants, harvesting water and energy off grid. Part of the, you know, reason you'd probably get involved in sustainable architecture, or one of the reasons, is a kind of response to the increase in fossil fuel use, despite kind of increased discussions about catastrophic global warming and climate change. Staggering that it was 1.5% in 2017 and 2.1% in 2018. So it's, I mean, I'm sure it's a really political issue across most of the world. It certainly is in Australia. About, you know, our current Prime Minister is just talking about reinvesting in gas, and the recent budget announcement by the federal government in Australia pretty much left renewable energy on its own, with this weird kind of statement that no, renewable energy is now at a point where it's looking after itself and making itself enough money. It doesn't need any government help. Interestingly, you know, coal and gas that need government assistance still get the attention. So I'm not sure how that works, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. I guess it's also a response to throwaway culture. You know, building sites have, you know, huge skip bins that, you know, they throw away a whole bunch of materials. A really particularly alarming statistic was that 80% of the 8 million tons of plastic that enter the ocean every year is single-use plastic. So straws, plastic bottles, plastic bags, packaging, that sort of stuff. And tyres present a really serious problem as well. So 1.5 billion car tyres reach what's called end of life. Essentially, you know, that's, you know, they're really not seen as upcyclable or reusable. And so obviously building with car tyres is something that that responds to that, you know, in a sense. So it's been written about this Earthship philosophy and the sustainable build philosophy by a whole bunch of people. It's gaining a bit of a renaissance of interest. Harkness talks about the idea that you would build such a building as a bit of a novel reordering of what their builder dwellers consider contaminating or polluting, and what you consider beautiful and useful. So I guess in terms of useful, obviously we see car tires, empty beverage cans, plastic bottles, glass bottles, that sort of stuff as really useful. And some might suggest, I meant to put a photo in here of a bottle wall, but some might suggest walls made with bottles that let light through different colored glasses and so on are quite good looking, quite aesthetically pleasing. Some absolutely detest them, and that's fair enough. But we will be using glass bottles to build certain walls within the house as well. We actually found out the other day we need 2,200 cans to build the bond beam to attach the roof to the back wall. So we're short of developing a serious drinking problem. We're trying to source a whole bunch of cans at the moment from friends and family and that sort of thing. There's a Martin Freeney here on the bottom left is the architect that we work with, and he talks about the autonomy of Earthships, where essentially using reused and recycled materials that you don't need to then engage producers and manufacturers for, reusing car tires, and developing a thermal mass effect and the stacking effect with earth tubes essentially creates that autonomy that you kind of get living in these sorts of buildings. So there's ideas of opting out of normative assumptions around reliances on fossil fuels and non-renewables, opting out of throwaway consumerism. There's also a really great community aspect to Earthship building. It's not just something that, you know, an owner builder kind of goes, hey, cool, we'll build this thing on weekends. It's really, you know, developing relationships with the local community, with the wider community who are interested in learning and building these sorts of structures. And through all these kind of relationship building processes, we build these interdependent relationships where, you know, someone comes out and contributes certain, you know, whether it be labor or certain tools or knowledge to a community build like this. We then intend, obviously, to reciprocate. And so when someone else goes to build their Earthship or their kind of passive house in this way, you then, you know, we all go out and give them a hand to build what they want to do on the land that they've got. And obviously there's the recycle, reuse and upcycle concepts where, you know, you use car tires, cans, plastic bottles, cardboard is used in the tire wall to stop the dirt falling through the tires when you pound them. We try and use as much recycled timber as possible. Building site waste, we have you know, crew members for this build who are actually you know, have access to waste materials from a big corporate builder, and is just taking that stuff so that we can reuse it because it's just going to landfill. We actually use a lot of shade cloth as well. That, you know, I don't know if some of you might have seen when large buildings are built, quite often scaffold goes up around it and it gets wrapped in shade cloth. I always thought that was to kind of cover up what's going on, but I think more so it's probably so tools and materials don't fall off of scaffolds and hit people down below. But either way, that shade cloth quite often just gets rolled up and thrown away, brand new shade cloth. So a friend of mine who works on sites like that has actually brought us, you know, hundreds and hundreds of meters of near new shade cloth that was destined for landfill, that we'll use in the construction of this house that'll stay with the house. I don't know how I'm going for time here. I think we're almost kind of there, and then we can have a bit of a discussion. In terms of performance, there's going to be no requirement for active heating or cooling systems. Well, generally speaking, in an Earthship. There has been a discussion of, you know, if we don't quite get this right, and, you know, there might be a time where we need supplementary kind of heating in some of the rooms. There's some technology that's available that can run off solar to do that. In the straw bale part of the house, we do have a combustion stove to provide a little bit of backup heating in the kind of depth of winter, but it's expected that we won't need to use that very often. In terms of performance, Martin Freeney, the architect, has done a lot of research in terms of modelling and estimating performance, as well as actually, you know, recording data from Earthships in New Mexico and in Australia, and found that the annual energy load of an Earthship is about 0.1 megajoules per metre squared for heating and cooling. Now, in Australia, there's this nationwide house energy rating system, and in order to get the minimum in order to get approval for a build along the lines of this system is level 6, or 6 out of 10 stars is the minimum in South Australia at least. And that is, you have to use less than 96 megajoules per metre squared to heat or cool a house. So quite a lot more than the expected kind of energy use of an Earthship. Even a 10 out of 10 star rated home that generally kind of commercially built only need to achieve 3 megajoules per metre squared. So Earthship, if it's correctly built and obviously well insulated and the right materials are chosen and all of the kind of aspects of the site and everything kind of link in really nicely, you're looking at an incredibly low energy use to maintain a comfortable kind of lifestyle. Here are a few pictures. That's actually a stock photo of straw bales, but these pictures, the tire wall and earth tube inlet and another tire wall down here, are pictures from builds that the architect Martin Freeney has been part of. This is a computer rendering of what the greenhouse will look like in our Earthship. It won't be orange or pinky orange. This is just the computer rendering. It's a dark hardwood there. The colors are all out, but that's all right. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the elements of the Earthship. I think each element can stand alone as a really great method of building various kinds of structures. You don't need to combine them all. So I think, you know, learning about car tire use can be useful for other sorts of builds, etc. The tire wall, obviously, like I've mentioned, is great for a thermal mass, basically heat sink and then to radiate heat out through colder evenings. It's also good to, you know, keep the heat out in summer with the berm up the back of it. Straw bale is obviously really great for insulation. You can get structural straw bale walls as the structure is in the stud wall around it, and the straw essentially is packed in as insulation rather than load bearing. Earth tubes are really interesting. Now at Earthship in Ironbank, the architect's first survival model Earthship, they actually have a small electric fan to help bring that air through the underground. It's not necessarily needed. It can help, and I think we probably will end up doing that. But the idea of cooling with earth tubes is really great. I'll show you a diagram of how it works in a second. The greenhouse is a really important aspect of an Earthship. You don't tend to have them in tropical climates. They tend to be more useful in kind of desert and Mediterranean style climates like we've got. Tropical climates, you just, you know, essentially you've got that outside anyway. If you walk into a greenhouse like this at any time of the year, it really does feel like you're in a tropical climate. It's very humid, quite warm, and you can use that humidity and heat to obviously grow food and to heat and cool your house. Wastewater management's a really important part, as is off-grid components. So at the moment we're looking at solar. We'll look into wind. It's quite windy up there, and obviously we harvest our own water. So I've only got one more slide, and this is just a little bit about how the earth tubes work, because this is, for me, this is the most interesting part, and it's kind of how you sail the Earthship, a term obviously from Mike Reynolds, but living in an Earthship like this, you don't just kind of switch something on and go out for lunch or work or whatever and expect the house to be kind of exactly how you want it when you arrive home. You really need to work with what's going on outside, the time of year, all that sort of thing, and open and close things and manage the house constantly. So airflow is pretty much the heating and cooling of the Earthship. So we have these tubes that are about 250 millimeters in diameter. That's probably just under a foot in diameter. And they're buried beneath the berm of the house. This diagram actually shows the earth tubes around the wrong way. Ours would come out the other side behind the house. But they're buried at least a meter down where the temperature stays relatively stable, and around about sort of 13 to 15 degrees centigrade. And the idea is you get warm air inside the house, and you can open up vents in the ceiling, which essentially warm air rises, so it goes out the top. If you've got a bit of wind, it kind of helps that, because you get this kind of what's called the Venturi effect, where wind flows over the top of an opening and it actually creates a kind of low pressure, which helps suck the air out through the roof. Now, an Earthship is relatively sealed, or it's very well sealed. And so you essentially open up the vents down the bottom of the building in the back wall to the earth tubes. And when the hot air goes out through the roof, it needs to replace, or the house needs to replace that air with something. And so it drags relatively warm air from outside in through these cooling tubes and back into the house. And after a time, you'll end up kind of replacing the air inside with a different temperature air, referred to as the stack effect. So essentially in summer, you open the earth tubes. In winter, you tend to keep the earth tubes and the rooms all closed up and try and maintain as much heat in the building as possible. We can discuss that more if you kind of if someone needs to ask questions about how that sort of works. I've spent a bit of time thinking about it, and it's, I think, quite interesting, but I think I'll leave it there for now. There's a little slide here. I'll share these with Alex so that you can share them with everyone here and along your lines of networks and stuff. So here's a couple of links. We are on Facebook, updating people about how we go. And I also want to obviously give a plug to this Earthship Eco Homes. This is the architect, Martin Freeney, who works for the University of South Australia, and has been, fabulous in kind of teaching us about how Earthships work and designing this building with us. And actually, Marty and two other crew members are going to be the instructors on the workshop, where I think we have 27 people booked in, ready to go for a month to basically come out and learn how to construct all these aspects of the build from people like Marty and some guys, Charles and Brian. There were a few others in Western Australia who couldn't come over, and Victoria who couldn't come over, and certainly in North America who just absolutely couldn't get here, unfortunately, but it looks like it's going to work really well. But I'll leave it there and we can have a yarn if people have questions.
Great, thanks so much for that. That's a lot of information, and best of luck with your workshop. So do people pay for the workshop?
Yeah, they do. And when I say, we actually charge for the privilege, some people kind of go, oh, wow, like, really you're charging people to come and build your house for you? And it does sound and feel a bit strange at times. The fees, I can't remember how much they are. I think for a month I think people are paying around about $1,400 Australian for the month. In that, you get obviously the access to instruction from our architect and from other instructors who are teaching you how to kind of do these things. It also covers all of your food, accommodation. The meals are all cooked in a kind of community atmosphere. Everyone's kind of rostered on to do some cooking every few days. As owner builders, we provide all of the ingredients and all of that, plus, obviously facilities and those sorts of things. So it's interesting that it does cost, but essentially it's just a cover costs type thing. No one's actually making any money out of it.
So if you have 20, did you say 20 people?
We have 27 people, I think, overall registered for it.
So that's a lot of people coming together to do a build for a month. And so how do you manage like all the waste and bringing in water and all of that?
Yeah. We've got, by that shed that I sort of pointed out in one of the earlier slides, we've got, I think we're up to about 37,500 litres of rainwater. And the tank on the actual site is now there. So we're in the process of slowly kind of pumping that water into the larger tank. And we've probably got another week or so worth of rain down here to hopefully refill the other tanks. So we're expecting to have enough for the month at probably close to 50,000 litres. You know, you can get water trucked in, but it's obviously not ideal. You don't want to be shifting water with a truck. So we're hoping that'll be okay. In terms of facilities like toilets and showers, I'm actually about to start building these things on weekends at the moment. The toilets are composting toilets. We're using recycled pickle drums, which, I mean, they're about 200 litres. And you get them really cheap from this sort of recycling joint a bit further north of the city of Adelaide. And with a few modifications and things, you can kind of essentially, use sawdust and other sorts of enzymes and materials to create a relatively efficient composting toilet. And after, about 12 months or so, all of the waste has kind of turned into usable compost. We wouldn't recommend ever using it for planting fruit and veg in terms of things that grow in the ground or on the ground, but it's perfectly fine to use to plant sort of citrus and fruit trees and things in soil that has that compost contributing to it. So we're relatively low waste. The shower systems are, I have found some old 15-litre vinegar tubs that a friend of mine was throwing out at their cafe around the corner. We're painting them matte black and essentially plumbing them together with some old irrigation hose we've found. And they will heat up during the day and provide warm showers in the evening for people. We've got quite a few of them. We do have a few participants and even crew who've said that they will happily wash themselves by jumping in the dam at the end of the day, and that's perfectly welcome. It's a bit cold, but.
Great. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
So this is happening now with COVID-19, and are there any special precautions?
It is going to happen, yeah. In I think we're about 4 weeks away now. There was a lot of anxiety about COVID and how it would affect the workshops. Like I said, the Earthship biotecture crew, Michael Reynolds' team, was unable to come over. There's talk about maybe using Zoom for Mike Reynolds to provide kind of guest lectures and workshops and things via video conferencing. In terms of people actually on site, we legally, technically in the state of South Australia don't need, I found out last night, actually don't need kind of specific people employed as COVID marshals, which we do in some parts of the country and in some venues and things. However, we're all kind of conscious of what's going on and responding to, the situation as it kind of develops. We're in a pretty lucky position in South Australia. I think we currently have 3 or 4 confirmed cases in the state. Nobody's in intensive care on ventilators or anything like that. So we've been dealing with this really well. But that's not to say, you have one person and it could all be over. So we do have contingencies in terms of if we need to cancel or if people can't make it for whatever reason. certainly we're open to that. But it's an interesting kind of climate that we're living in, and yeah, we just have to play it by ear, listen to the authorities and those who are kind of, I think, doing a reasonable job here. It's a good question.
Are there any women involved in this movement?
Yeah, the crew were predominantly men. There were a few women who have or who are on the list of crew around Australia, but haven't been able to travel because of COVID. I haven't seen the latest enrolment figures. I'm under the impression that it's close to kind of probably 40, 60, even close to 50% in terms of people identifying as either men or women who are enrolling for these workshops. It seems to be, again, where where you'll find this along in a lot of sort of spaces, it seems to be kind of men leading these sorts of things. If you look at other workshops and other examples of this type of build, it is quite male or masculine dominated. But in South Australia, at least, we're seeing a lot of women participating in the sustainability side of things, and in terms of sustainable architecture and scholarship around it as well. I do know quite a few women who are working on that.
Yeah, I asked that because One House, Many Nations that's one of the things that we've really been aware of, and we're seeing it happen in some communities too, where it starts off as like a grassroots movement with women, and then as soon as it gets a little more technical, those women get kind of pushed out for different reasons. So we're trying to think of ways to mitigate that and make it any kind of building or designing or community work to make it so that women and queer people or non-binary people are comfortable being a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, listening to you talk on Thursday last week, and it made me reflect on, how it's all sort of playing out with, the character of everyone involved in this build and in the movement more generally here. And you're right. I think it is disappointing that you see, grassroots movement, the crux of the start, the genesis of these movements are, predominantly women and gender diverse people who then do get pushed out when, you start talking to architects, to engineers, to, materials providers and that sort of thing. I've certainly talked with my partner about her experiences in this. It was decided really early on that it would be best for her to be the project manager. And I mean, that was for a number of reasons. There's no point having two project managers. I think that would be really bad. I think I know she certainly has the skills to be a project manager. And I don't think I do in this respect. Something that her and I have talked about is her experiences of working with trades and contractors, and quite often she remarks at the almost sort of instant dismissal that she hears in the voices of men who are involved in the provision of contracting and other services. Not always, but yeah, obviously that experience is there. The trade industries that we work with are incredibly, heteropatriarchal, and I expect it's. I can see that it's a difficult sort of place to navigate for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're kind of coming up to a time when we can close, but I just want to make sure that Anybody else, if you have a question or a comment, that you have the opportunity?
I wouldn't mind asking a question if that's all right, Alex.
Yep, go.
Okay, Tristan, thank you so much for a very generous sharing of your experience and your dreams and kind of the path that you're carving forward here. I actually want to also echo the sentiment of what was just being discussed about the role of identity in these paths forward with respect to literally constructing our futures. I think that as you were describing that that this is a kind of a cultural movement in a lot of ways, right? That even the act of building is in itself a communal event. It's a shaping of a community and even a teaching one, right? So the idea of building is not a trade profession in this case. It's actually an educational endeavor, and it absolutely involves trades, but it's not primarily for-profit enterprise. And so I think this model of constructing through teaching is a really profoundly important one to recognize as well, because I think it's sometimes maybe easily overlooked and maybe dismissed as an academic exercise perhaps, or one that's sort of a microcosm of maybe a larger enterprise. But I actually don't see the difference, and I feel that we actually should be trying to transform our efforts to physically shape our environments into extensions of what our communities themselves need. And I think that it has to do a lot with who's involved, like you were just talking about, with relation to gender identity and just diverse means of inclusion, because what we're talking about is cognitive diversity as well, aren't we? We're talking about how people think differently, they see differently, and they behave differently, and they have different perspectives of what is valued. And that has a lot to do with like what you're talking about, the value of reclaiming materials, the value of reclaiming natural energy flows through the buildings and all that. So I feel like it's all connected is what I'm trying to say. And I think I really am grateful for the kind of efforts that you're making, because I think that it's something that we all strive for, I think, or can strive for in our own ways. I just have a really quick question. It's a big one, but I hope that maybe, I know that we're short on time, but I'm deeply curious about it. And I'm wondering if you could just for a moment, just speak to it, which is, I'm not personally familiar with the state of Indigenous housing as it is in Australia. And in North America, and particularly in Canada, it's a very challenging state of affairs, as you probably well know, especially having worked with Alex. But I guess I was wondering, is it the same kind of conditions in Australia, or are there similar challenges, do you find? Are there sort of kinship issues that you find are similar to what we're working with here in North America? Or are there, would you say there maybe structurally different issues that you think would relate to housing in itself?
It's a really good question. I have to say at the outset, I haven't done a whole bunch of research into Indigenous housing in particular, but what we sort of see in various kind of contexts. I mean, obviously, Indigenous populations and populations around Australia are incredibly diverse, but we do see obviously overrepresentations in terms of homelessness, poverty, access to services and those sorts of things across the board. We have, essentially, I mean, this obviously isn't going to be specific or, specific only to Australia, but, we constantly get kind of inundated, or I get inundated with stories about, housing crises for Indigenous peoples in remote communities, and particularly from builders, not builders who are associated with this project, but from people who've been working in community to build houses, and then come back with these stories of like, all these Indigenous people are given houses by the government, and we pay for these houses, and then they just destroy them, and someone set fire to their living room, or they don't want to live in them, and how ungrateful, and all this kind of stuff that just fuels this ongoing kind of racial divide. And it's clear that what we're not kind of doing in that particular context is looking at, looking at the kind of, at the needs, at the perspectives, you know, the ontological perspective of housing and, like you said, kinship and community, and the differences that exist across Western and Indigenous frameworks or ideology or ideas. And so essentially what's happening is, you know, government's going, well, we have to, you know, wear this burden of providing housing for Indigenous communities, and we'll highlight the fact that, you know, they're ungrateful. When actually, you know, it's just the government sort of throwing money at an idea rather than actually engaging in the needs, finding out the needs and the kind of the cultural and ontological perspectives of those who actually require housing. So I think, you know, what this type of build and other kinds of builds like the One House Many Nations project can offer in that regard is an opportunity to engage with community, with the entire process of, you know, not only how do we build, but why do we build, where do we build, when do we build, you know, what sort of things do we build, who gets to choose, who gets to make decisions and be involved in those sorts of things to really, I guess, you know, in a sense, decolonize the provision of services or decolonize housing in any country. There are obviously other issues that, you know, you might see in more sort of urban settings in terms of, you know, Indigenous peoples being clearly discriminated against in terms of, you know, applying for rental properties and those sorts of things as well, which again, I haven't done a whole bunch of research into, but certainly there are issues that need to be kind of addressed. And I think taking a bit more of an open approach like this and other like One Nation, One House Many Nations is going to provide a lot of benefit in that sense.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Erica had a question about that, you know, the Earthship building is really a land-based practice, and have there been youth involved?
2-year-old daughter's on site.
Right
on. No, not really. I think from memory, I don't think there are any youth enrolled to come along to the workshop. There's certainly welcome, you know, to come along with guardians and significant others, I guess. But no, I'm not sure about the kind of youth movement in regards to Earthship. That would be a really interesting thing to go and find out about, and I'll probably go and look that up now. But I wish I could provide you with some examples, but no, I can't on that respect. In that respect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tristan. If you want to stop the screen share there, we can see if people want to put their cameras on and kind of wave if they feel comfortable, knowing that we're recording right now. But it's nice to see some faces. So
thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about this. I hope it's kind of, you know, it's what you were sort of hoping to hear about and to think about. But yeah, maybe you can share my email address or something with people if they're interested. I'll be more than happy to talk more and yeah, catch up later on.
That'd be great. And yeah, if you want to send the link or the video to me and to Sylvia as well. And tomorrow the 5 youth in Big River will be watching the video, and they might have questions, so we'll kind of connect with them.
For sure, that'd be great. See if you can edit out that little intercession from who knows who.
We might leave it in there because I think it can open up a discussion, you know,
sure,
around a number of things actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Well, thanks everyone. Have a good evening. And once the video is up, we'll put it, we'll probably get Idle No More to put it on the Idle No More website. So I will put the link in the Facebook page for One House, Many Nations, and then we can watch it from there.
Sounds great.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alex.
everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.